Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, I didn't know anything about the last airbender. Then, everything changed when my best friend said, let's do a podcast. We could call it Avatar State Radio. 6,953 days had passed before I discovered Avatar, not the blue cats, but a 19-year-old cartoon. Like Gaang, I have a lot to learn, but I believe I'll love Avatar The Last Airbender. Welcome to this week's edition of Avatar State Radio. I'm the host that knows nothing about this show or universe except for the 6 episodes I've watched. Kevin Gallagher.
And I'm the host that knows everything, always, everywhere, all at once. Mike D'Angelo.
As I was setting you up to talk, I completely forgot that I gotta say my name. And of course,
do you want to say your name again?
Kevin Gallagher, the last podbender, as I'm from now on calling myself. And I think not this very episode, but I believe very shortly I'll be starting to schedule episodes to release, which means that we are recording officially about a month and a half in advance of when we release. Though I plan on releasing in May, so maybe we're actually recording 2 months in advance of release. Regardless,
heck yeah,
we are recording so far in advance that I don't know what's happening in your future. Well, I guess it's your present, people. But anyway, you can find us on Avatar State Radio. And of course, we don't have our own social media because I'm not managing another one. But you can find me on all the social media at That Nerdy Kev. And you can find Mike usually at that at Tellist or at Tellist Books or at That Tellist Guy.
I like how you're going through all this stuff at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, I know. I'm switching it up. I want people, because people tune out at the end. Anyway, so now I think I wrote down the title of, we're talking about episode 6 of Avatar.
Episode 6, Imprisoned.
Imprisoned. Okay, I put imprisonment in my notes, and I was like, I think that's wrong. So Imprisoned. I was close.
You're very close.
And this one was another episode that felt like it was more world building than it was, and character building than it was like driving the story forward. And I guess it really depends on what you classify the story. I would say the story is like story A, the main story is, the last airbender, Aang, learning to become an avatar, which he doesn't get any closer to that goal in this episode, but it was still like a fine episode, a great episode, actually.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I saw a little bit of earthbending from Aang.
Oh no! So to me, he was using his air. I have that note. You're talking about the airbending gun.
Totally a joke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh no! I was talking about when he lifted the rock with the vents.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What I really liked about that scene, I know we're jumping so far ahead in the episode right now, was that everyone was like, "That's the lemur is the airbender."
Right. They're like, no, you idiot.
Like,
girl.
Like that is, and that like made me think like, and I think we maybe touched on this very, very briefly I don't even know if it was an episode of Avatar State Radio proper, but about like, is it just humans that can bend, or can the animals do it as well?
I believe that we have briefly spoken about that. And again, to your point, I don't know if it was on air or if it was just like in talking. And I don't know if I mentioned that it'll be, pointed out or not. So
yeah,
we'll let the animation speak for itself when it can.
Right. And I like I said, I really love the idea of Momo, who was like very much, as always, kind of, I guess, comic relief, right? But like he like helps in this episode multiple times. Well, I don't know that I guess that's not helping, right? Like them thinking that he's earthbender. But
right, just a comic relief moment.
Right, but he does help, when there's an actual time for like battle and stuff, which we'll get to. Right. But this is my first note is earthbender, which I think jumps a couple things ahead, because we see our crew, Team Atla, Team Aang, whatever you want to call them,
the gang
with a double A. In the woods, like looking for food, and Sokka finding various forms of nuts and or rocks.
Right. Or berries.
Or berries. I forgot about the berries.
I might have added the berries.
Yeah, I don't that honestly, like I was watching it, but then I didn't start taking notes until after that. And it's really just the whole purpose of that scene really is kind of, it feels like it's just setting up like, oh, like they aren't just on easy street during their travels. Like they are running into some issues like, oh, how, like food, like we need to eat.
Right.
And then of course they bump into, and I don't remember the earthbender's name, but the kid.
Haru.
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 Haru. That sounds about right.
You just thought I was saying hello.
Yes. Haru is
Oh, Haru.
Haru. How are you? They run to him, and it was the first time we saw like a bender like afraid to be showing off his bending skills.
Right. We had early on in like episode 1 where Sokka was telling Katara to be afraid to show her powers, but this is the first time that we've seen someone out in the wild, out in the world, who's got that kind of mentality. And I think like a lot of what that's for is like, we were just at Omashu where, you know, like this entire kingdom is like, hey, we've got stuff handled. So they want to kind of show you, I guess, at this point, it's not as easy as it looks out there for people who don't live in like the big cities.
Which is actually really interesting because like the vibe you get, and you know, for the whole series, and certainly it hammers at home here, is that the Fire Nation has its grasp on like the entire world. And we know that's not entirely true because they talked about how in the episode 1 or 2, how the water tribes, you know, went off to help the Earth Kingdom's battle. And we've seen like Prince Zuko talk about how like, oh, we just, or maybe it wasn't him, maybe it was the other guy that I forget his name, but he was the asshole that
Commander Zhao.
Yeah, one of them were like discussing how like, oh, we just have to win this battle and then like we're done, we win. So that like last week's episode was with Omashu.
Omashu and Boomy.
Yeah. So like that was a very like jarring thing to see because it's like, oh, like it seems like they have it easy. They don't have to worry about the Fire Nation here. They obviously are bending at will. And then this week we get what I would picture the rest, like most of the world in Atla is like, basically fearful of the Fire Nation or occupied by the Fire Nation, and people very much the post prequel trilogy world of Star Wars, where if you're Benders or Jedi, they're in hiding. Like that's what it feels like this world is made
right.
of. Benders that are except for the Fire
Post
Nation.
Order 66.
Yeah. Like it seems like unless you're a firebender, the Sith, you're hiding your bending or force abilities. In no wonder Dave Filoni was hired for Star Wars.
There you go. He was already doing those kind of stories.
Right. But yeah, it just it feels like,
and he was the director of this episode as well.
Oh, I didn't even notice that, which is weird because I normally notice who the director is. But yeah, it just feels like that's what the whole world should be, is what this episode kind of implies, that this little village is occupied by the Fire Nation, and that, you know, because earthbenders have been taken from this village because of their earthbending abilities, that every village and every town would be like in a similar situation.
Right.
So while I'm glad that's not the case, as we learned last week, it is not nice, but it is, it's interesting to see the flip side of last week, where, you know, this little village is literally like in fear of the Fire Nation.
Right. And I mean, for good reason, because when the Fire Nation is deciding that, hey, we're going to take these people, we're going to do something smart about it. We're going to put them into a situation where they're out in the water on, you know, a metal piece of equipment that they can't bend.
Right.
And, you know, no one thinks at first, hey, there's something further into this, you know, this piece of equipment where we can use that as a weapon.
Right.
And I mean, even aside from that, they've just been beaten down so much that their morale is gone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something that we see later on. And touching really briefly on that the Momo scene where we have the fake bending, earth bending with Katara and Aang. I think this is my note here is let's get captured on purpose, and I put that note down because that is one of my favorite tropes, but it's not a trope that I've ever really seen in like legitimate storytelling that often. Like it's a trope that I'm familiar with when people are having like in actual play, like in an actual play role playing game, or at the table. Like you're not even in an actual play. Like when you're just sitting at the table with your friends playing a role playing game. Like I feel
Yeah.
like that's
You might see it in video games too, but yeah, you very rarely see it in like literature or TV shows or anything like that.
and it is hands down one of my favorite tropes because it is such a silly concept of like this is how we're going to win is by getting captured, which I mean but it does make sense. Like there is some like sanity to that thought process. And I mean at the end of the day, as we find out in this episode, it works out very well for Katara and uh Huru Huri Huru
Haru.
Haru. Guys, we warned you at the start of this show that I was going to be terrible at pronouncing these names. You're lucky I get Katara, Aang, and Sokka correct.
That's right.
But yeah, it is. I'm glad that they did that because that is just and they didn't do it. I mean, they did it in a comical way in the sense that like we thought, well, the Fire Nation thought Momo was the bender, but ultimately it didn't like it. That was the only comical piece of that plan, right? Everything else was like a very serious part
Well,
of the
I
plan.
mean, the Sokka and Katara talking back and forth thing was kind of funny.
Well, yes,
Like
yes.
being excessive about the way that they were kind of like, telegraphing their argument.
Right. But see, I guess I mean like outside of that, like for me, at least everything that I've ever witnessed when you have this plan, it's usually just shenanigans from start to finish. Um and
Right.
and I mean that's something very much that this show isn't shenanigans from start to finish. This show is very much, it does have that fun, playful spirit being a kid's show, but it's also tackled some more serious stuff in episodes of as we have discussed in the past. So I was again, it's just I wrote that down because that is a favorite trope of mine that you don't see too often in mainstream media.
Yeah, no, you're right.
The next two notes I have, and the one I'm going to mention first. Now, for those that don't know anything about how we record, which why would you? Because this isn't a video podcast. We have little titles under our name in the screen. I'm always the last pod bender, and Mike changes it week to week to week to week, and his is oh my, and was that George Takei?
It was George Takei, absolutely.
I was like, that voice is so like. There's no way it's not. Like if it's not, then I don't like who is this master wordsmith that can imitate Mr. George.
Oh yeah, I don't think like of all the voices that are out there, like he's got one of the most unique, like the cadence of his speech, just like the tone of voice, like he always drips with like just like a little bit of ego
Yes.
when he's playing these like rougher characters and stuff. Like he does a remarkable job.
What I love is that like I feel like that's just his voice. Like his voice feels like he's ripe and full of ego, but like he in real life, and that's what he sounds like in real life, but like that's not the way he carries himself in real life.
Right.
And it's like it's such a voice that like doesn't go with the person as far as that's concerned, but what an unmistakable voice. And like of course why would I doubt that George Takei is in this show, because it feels like it's very up his alley as well. Like it's very much something that he would drive with. My next note,
I had thought,
go ahead.
Oh, well, here, let me jump in real quick. It might be the same note for all I know, but I had thought that the second like popular voice, Haru's father, was played by another veteran actor, Lance Reddick, who unfortunately passed away either last year or earlier this year.
Right.
Come to find that it was actually Kevin Michael Richardson, who's a very prolific voice actor.
So it's funny, then I was wrong as well, because I didn't put down Lance Reddick. My note was Clancy Brown.
Clancy Brown does voice a character in either Avatar or Legend of Korra. I don't recall what part he plays, but he does voice a character.
But
Um,
the Haru's father, uh, very similar sounding, or maybe I'm just remembering Clancy Brown incorrectly, but uh,
well, Clancy Brown also is very prolific in voice acting, and sometimes he stirs it up. So like, if you're used to seeing him on like Lost or in Shawshank Redemption or Pet Cemetery 2 or stuff like that, he's got a very him voice. But if you're listening to him as Mr. Krabs, very different voice.
that's true. That's his. He's similar to like, maybe not. I was gonna say he's similar to Mark Hamill in that sense, where like Mark Hamill, like that it's Mark Hamill when he's in live action, but when he does voices, he's not so much Mark Hamill. But also, now the Joker's an outlier there, right? Like the Joker's so unique with that voice, but a lot of his other voice work, I never know it's him, but it's also very similar to not only his real voice, but like the voices he does outside of the Joker, at least from everything I've heard.
So he did a role in Darksiders, and I can't remember. He's the Watcher in Darksiders, and it's a video game that came out on the Xbox 360, I want to say, and it is very much just the Joker, but a little bit more like undead kind of sounding. But to your point, yeah, I don't think that there's ever been like another character, but like the two of them. Like he doesn't usually dip his feet in like the same pool too often.
Right. Anyway, I mean that has nothing to do with this episode. I think what the crux of this episode is really Katara trying to, it starts out saving, the earthbender that she, Haru, who got caught. But once she's there and she's captured to save him, her mission really becomes, one of trying to inspire all these earthbenders who aren't from the same village necessarily. Like they're from all these various villages that have been, raided and taken over by and occupied by the Fire Nation. So, and as you said earlier, like their spirits have been broken. And she has like a rousing speech that the Fire Nation like allows happen. Because
right, you're watching it happen and you're like, how are they not like stomping this out or anything? And they're just like, let it.
Well, and it goes to your point of George Takei's character and that like sense of ego that you hear in that voice. I think that's exactly what it is. Like he doesn't believe that they're going to do anything. He believes that their spirits are so broken that they won't do anything. And you see that, after she, gets them to, hey, here's your coal, here is your earth, here is what's gonna give you the ability to fight back. And I guess, to roll that back a little bit, that we kind of skipped that over is when Aang and Sokka come to rescue Katara, she says, I'm not leaving, because she's, again, this is her mission is now to like save everyone. And they come up with this plan to, in this coal factory, well, I guess the earthbenders, your power is, I guess, limited to where like you can see the earth or maybe even feel it to a degree. So they come up with this plan to get the coal from the factory into the prison yard. And so she's standing there with all this coal, and yet again, and I'm going to keep calling this character George Takei because I don't know the character's name, even though I know you said it earlier. But
well, no, he was just called the Warden.
Oh, he was just called the Warden. Oh, that's easy as hell. I can say that. I can say the Warden, but I'm still going to call him George Takei. George is still so sure that the spirits are broken that he's just like laughing it off, and is turning, like he turns around, and it is that moment of like, I think for me it feels like it's a combination of Katara's speech in that moment, maybe even the moment earlier in the episode, but definitely that moment where she's standing there with the coal telling them like, here's your power, here's how you can fight back. That combined with like how disrespectful George is to the prisoners. Uh, and the obviously like the fighting spirit that Haru no Haru, oh, god damn it yeah, Haru,
Yay!
I got it. Awesome. That Haru had, since we met him, right? Like he's had that fighting spirit since the very beginning. Where he throws the first piece of coal, the first rock, and kind of starts the fight. Where now, the resistance is ready to go.
So Haru steps up. Haru steps up and throws the first rock, and when he's endangered, that's when Tyro steps up and is like, "You're not going to hurt my boy," and then that begins the domino effect.
Yeah, and that is, obviously, like not only hopeful for these benders here, right? Where and we see at the end of the episode where they're ready to, like, all fight again, and they're like they've gotten their fighting spirit back. It's not only helpful, hopeful for that. In the moment of that battle, it's like, okay, this is like what we want to see, like the world do. We want to see the world come back and fight back, because it's clear, and maybe we've had glimpses of it throughout the series so far, where the Fire Nation has, obviously, beaten certain kingdoms and cities to a pulp, or left like ash in their wake. But that we get this, this little prison yard represents, I know it's just the earthbenders, but in reality it represents all these different worlds or cities or whatever that are like rising up to take on the Fire Nation.
Right. Now, one other thing that happened in the episode, which, at this point, we don't really know if it gets resolved, but we saw that amidst all the fighting and everything, Katara lost her mother's necklace. And in the briefest of spots of the episodes, we see that Prince Zuko, who at this point doesn't even have a single line to say, picks up that necklace once he visits that, like cold Derek, we'll call it.
Yeah. And my note with that is that I feel like we haven't seen him in a hot minute. Like I don't think we saw him in the last episode.
Correct.
I guess maybe the episode before that we did, but it feels like he's been missing from action for quite some time, which I guess again kind of goes to the strength of this storytelling, right? And I think we said this last week because he wasn't there last week.
Right. Yeah, and you don't even notice he played a big part in the episode prior to that, because that was the Kyoshi warriors, where he invaded that village, and that was a big part of Aang's journey to realize that him being present in certain places puts people in danger. But yeah, you're right. In the Omashu episode, we did not get any Zuko, and we get just the briefest of kind of passes with him, and no Uncle Iroh at all.
Right. And again, that's just, I know last week I kind of was like, for the majority of the podcast episode last week, I was like, oh, this episode was just filler. It was fine. It was good. And and then at the end of it, I think I came around, I was like, oh, I guess it was really better than I thought, because you don't think about the fact that you don't see Iroh or Zuko or anything like that. And this episode's very much the same. It actually feels very similar as far as like, all right, this is an episode that isn't pushing the main story forward. It's just kind of world building and giving us a little bit more of what's going on in all of Atla, outside of the Gaang. And because you don't think about who, Zuko and Iroh, I think Iroh especially, they're two characters that I really am fascinated with. And the fact that like you can go almost a full 45 minutes between the two episodes, and me not see them or think about them because I'm not seeing them, that speaks volumes to the quality of the episode we just watched.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, the assumption obviously is that we get more of them in spots where there would be those intersects and those crossovers.
Right. My only other note is the sign is what Tyro, is that the dad's name?
Yep.
When he says when George says he can't swim and he says don't worry about it, cowards float.
Right. That's a very good line.
it was, yeah, it made me smile. Though it, in reality, like that's dark because like presumably, like the warden is now dead because he can't swim.
Right. Maybe some of the people who ended up in the drink with him helped him out, but he wasn't historically known for treating his peers well either, as he
Yeah, he tossed
threw
the captain
captain
overboard.
Right.
All right, so that I don't have anything else to touch on the episode. It was good. That's my final note is my thoughts on the episode. It was good. It was a solid episode.
Yep.
I enjoy episodes like this. Sometimes they aren't necessarily my favorite, but I like every TV series that have these like episodes that maybe don't mean anything. They're usually some of my favorites, or at least my well liked ones, because it gives us so much world building,
Right.
and
It
tells
helps to
us
set the
about.
tone.
Yes, absolutely. So the solid episode. I think I enjoyed it slightly more than last week's episode, and that's simply only because I had issues with, oh God, what was his name? The king.
Wait, you're talking
King
about
Big.
last episode, King Boomy?
Yeah, yeah, Boomy. I had those little like minor inconveniences to me, like about how we don't see more of like this relationship between Aang and his best friend that's still
Right.
alive. And that's a me issue, I think. But I did like this. I liked this episode slightly more because it just felt there was less personal connections with our main gang, and that means that like when you have a world building episode like this, you can kind of like have a start and finish in 22 minutes and not have to really worry about anything else.
Right. Now, on the other hand, the next episode that we're about to watch and talk about next week is our very first episode 1 of a two-parter. So we are getting into some deeper stuff. So
that's not fair to the first episode, the first 2 episodes. I feel like the first two episodes were also
technically were they part 1 and part 2?
I think so.
They
and now
it was like if you were watching it on TV, one would be declared part 1 and part 2, in the case of the next 2 episodes.
Okay. Yeah, I think what happened is that the first 2 episodes of the series aired on the same night. So it didn't feel like a 2-parter, I guess, when you watch it. I don't know. But to me, they're directly related. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, Mike.
I have
but that's good. I'm excited for that.
That is good. Do you want to hear my one bit of trivia?
Let's hear it.
All right. So Haru's mother is voiced by Pat Music, who is the mother of Mae Whitman, who is the voice of Katara.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat.
Yep. There's a couple of other things, but some of them are they border on the spoilers territory with the rest of the series and the rest of the Atla world. So we're gonna leave that be for now.
Well, and I got the George Takei one. That's the
right.
That's the one that stood out to me. Right, I thought for sure I was like, oh, this. If I didn't know who George Takei was, this would be Mike trivia for sure.
Oh yeah, 100%. And to be perfectly honest, like there's not a huge amount of crossover that we know like from him besides Star Trek. You might know him from Heroes.
Yeah, but just like barely, right? Like I don't really remember Heroes because as much as I liked that, at least that first season, it is kind of a largely forgettable show. And I say this as like the world was like taken by storm by Save the Cheerleader.
Right.
And it literally means nothing now. Whereas Star Trek obviously stands the test of time. And like, I think that when you think of Star Trek, there's like probably 3 names that everyone, whether they're a Star Trek fan or not, thinks of when it comes to that show. And that's William Shatner, George Takei, and Patrick Stewart.
Right.
I don't know that there's any other names that and honestly, I don't know that there's another. I can maybe pull 1 or 2 more out just because I'm nerdy enough to know. But beyond that, like someone that like knows Star Trek less than me, they can pull those 3 names for sure.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
So George Takei, and I mean, I also know him for like he was for people that are listening to the show that are from the Philadelphia area. There was a talk show called Kid Chris on one of the radio stations for a while, and George Takei would do that show every so often, and he was just a really good, like, George Takei is a really good dude, really funny dude, and like also like cares about people, and in a genuine way, of all like walks of life too. Like he seems like one of the true genuine caring Hollywood people out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Well, if that's all we have for this week's episode, we'll keep it a little short this week, shorter than we normally do. But
Hey,
that was
30
kind of the
minutes.
promise.
Still longer than the actual episodes of Avatar.
Yeah. Eventually we'll have, I feel like eventually we'll have like that 15-minute episode at some point.
Right.
But anyway, you can find me, Kevin Gallagher, on the interwebs at That Nerdy Kev, everywhere that I'm on social media except for Facebook. That's at That Nerdy Kev 1984. You can find me on my other podcasts. Everything is awesome at awesomepodcast.com. And anything else that's important, like I said, they'll be on social media. Mike, where can they find you?
Hey, we'll keep it tight today. You can find me on tellest.com.
There you go. And of course, this has been Avatar State Radio, helping those in the need of escaping imprisonment from the Fire Nation. Go be an earthbender and rise up right here on avatarstateradio.com.